Time to meet this morning's guest. We've got a minute and a half to talk to him before we go to the break, and here's Richard Paterson. Richard, good morning.
Good morning.
I read of you provide strategic financial and commercial support to SMEs and charities. Loosely translated, what does that mean?
Loosely translated, so I am a finance director for a number of small businesses. So I support them and give them financial advice about their business and help them grow their business essentially.
What's an SME then?
A small and medium-sized enterprise. So businesses typically below around, I think the European definition is around £200 million turnover. So relatively sizable.
Oh, so that doesn't strike me as being in any way small.
You know, absolutely.
Yeah. I had to ask the question because I say, when it comes to financial matters, I'm not the man really to be talking to, but there we go. I mean, are we finding at this moment, I mean, that is money tight for people who need it, or is it there and available?
That's a good question. I would say that there are certain businesses who are growing, and I think it's a good market at the moment, particularly in and around the region. So I think there are businesses who are growing rapidly, and I think things have improved over the last 6-12 months. But that's not to say that I think that's the same across all sectors of the economy.
But when you look at the whole issue of money, and for businesses, are organisations such as yours and the work you provide, is it there because they really, though they're in business, they don't actually know enough?
I think so. I think every business could do with support. So if you might be an owner-managed business, and therefore you've got specialist knowledge about the product or the service or the thing that you make, but actually you don't know a huge amount about running a business. There's quite a big difference between running a business and building a ship. And therefore, what I provide that extra expertise that isn't within the organisation to help them do that.
Are you horrified sometimes when you go in and see that they are actually sort of trying to work out where they're going on the back of a cigarette paper type of thing?
Horrified, probably no. But I am surprised. I'm continually surprised about how people can grow businesses to the size that they can build them to without having proper controls and processes in place. But that is just the nature of, I think, the beast and how businesses grow.
So is it a question that you need a good business plan, really, before you can go forward?
Yeah, I would absolutely recommend to any business to have a good, robust business plan. But again, sometimes you get growth either unexpectedly or quickly or before you have planned for it, and therefore, but you still need to have that self-awareness that you need to do something about managing your business, because what you don't want to do is create your wealth and actually start wasting the money that you're creating.
Does that happen sometimes?
Yeah, without question. So without the right controls and processes in place, you will inevitably let money slip through your fingers without the proper controls in place.
Is this because they're so focused on the next step that they're not actually thinking about the money coming in, where it's going, what they're doing with it?
Yeah. So even something like controlling your bad debt and the money that's owed to you, I think is important. So some businesses don't have robust processes and procedures in place to enable them to do that, and therefore enabling them to have a simple process whereby they chase debt on a weekly basis or a fortnightly basis will help them collect more cash than they would otherwise.
Do you think part of it is because they're remembering, if it's a small business that owes them money or a smaller one, they're remembering when they started and how difficult it was for them, and so they don't want to bring them up too often?
There is an element of that, I think, without question. I would think it, but it's sometimes finance and money sometimes isn't the top of their priority list. They want to do the things that they want to do, like make the product or provide the service, and therefore actually money is kind of lower down the priority list than it ought to be.
I'm minded to think that earlier this week we heard about Caparo Industries. Massive business, huge, multi-million pound, 13 sites across this part of the world alone. How do they suddenly one day say, 1,500 jobs are going, we're going into administration? I mean, it didn't happen overnight, did it?
No, absolutely not. So that will have been known for a while. And again, it's about how the management of the business decides to articulate that to its staff and the wider public in general. So they'll just pick a time. So they don't necessarily want to do things by piecemeal, so they just want to go out and say, actually, this is what's happening and this is the solution.
Because I recall we've been talking about the price of cheap steel from China for some time. So should alarm bells have been ringing somewhere outside of that business? Should people have been saying, how are they still continuing to do all they do if they're struggling in the market?
It's possibly, and again, what is not clear, so I'm not a specialist in that sector, is whether those alarm bells have been ringing in the sector, and the sector's been aware. It's just only now, because it's becoming more to the public's attention with all the job cuts in the country related to the sector.
Because he came, of course, within a matter of hours of Tata Steel saying that they were closing Scunthorpe, they were closing in Lanarkshire, 1,200 jobs, as I recall there. I mean, this doesn't sound to me like we're in the best economic times that we perhaps thought we were.
No, but I think a lot of that is related to the economic impact of China's slowdown, I think. So even with the Chinese president being here, I think you will see a lot of it I suspect has been timed around his time here.
So in general, how is the economy? How are we doing at the moment?
My impression, and for the businesses that I work with and the people I talk to, I think it's relatively positive and relatively buoyant. I think we've come out of the recent decline, and we're now kind of in that, we're starting to grow again. You can feel there's a general optimism, and people spending money on things that they would typically rein back on in previous harder times.
I'm thinking when you go in somewhere, they call you in or however it works, and you go and look at it, do you within like an hour think, well, I can see exactly what the problem is? Why haven't they seen it?
It's not quite as easy as that. So sometimes it takes just a conversation with the managers to see, just to ask a couple of basic questions. But sometimes it's a longer period of time, and actually you have to look at kind of the root causes of what's happening. And then sometimes people just want support and help to help them grow, as opposed to they're in financial difficulty.
Because I mean, you mentioned a little earlier that sometimes in these situations, it doesn't need an awful lot doing to it. But, if they just sort of thought, I mean, do you say to them, look, you're doing this, and that's the return, but if you did that, the return will be so much better. And do they look at you and think, what a clever man?
Yeah, and absolutely. Sometimes it's just literally it's tweaking around the edges, and sometimes it takes someone impartial and not kind of stuck and blinded by being within the business to come in and say, actually, have you thought about doing slightly differently, or have you thought about tweaking what you do, because actually you'll get a greater return. And I think a number of businesses across the UK and across the world will use that impartial third-party advice to be able to give them a different view on their organisation.
And I suppose it's fair to say as well, isn't it, that if you are involved in something day to day, you don't see things as clearly, whereas you can go in completely open mind, you know their business, you know broadly what they do, and it is easier for you to see.
Absolutely, and sometimes I just go about it by just asking some very simple questions and some very obvious questions, and I can ask those questions being impartial, but that might trigger different thoughts and different views from the organisation.
Now, you're a trustee of Lovebrum. You've got an event tonight. What does Lovebrum actually do and talk about?
So Lovebrum is basically, we've got three main aims. Firstly, we want to provide funding and support to small charities and causes who are doing great work in Birmingham and providing positive tangible outcomes to the city of Birmingham. That's the first thing. We want to enable and encourage businesses to do business within the city. So without first looking to London or going to elsewhere or Manchester, we want to encourage people to look within Birmingham at the business trying to keep the business in Birmingham. And then the third thing is to encourage people to talk positively about the city. So if the people of Birmingham and the businesses in Birmingham are always constantly talking it up, people will begin to feel good about the city, and there'll be a general movement and positive.
Yeah. And things like Grand Central, the station, and the shopping development and everything. I mean, it's music to your ears, all that, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. I think you can see with the things that have come along up until now and the things that are due to come along, that Birmingham is really moving places and is really starting to put itself firmly at the top of them.
Because it's had a problem. I mean, you've worked all over the place, and I suspect that at times the image has not been good for it, has it? You've had to get through that barrier.
No, absolutely. So I think Birmingham has that image when you go past Spaghetti Junction of the power stations, and that it's a bit grey, it's a bit kind of 1960s-ish, and I think we're slowly starting to change that perception. But the way that all the work that Marketing Birmingham do is all really positive, but actually it needs the people who live here and work here to talk positively about it as well before everyone starts to feel that much positive, more positive.
And that is the worry, isn't it, that people still have this slightly downbeat approach to it. Richard Paterson, thank you so much for being with us this morning. All power to your elbow with Love Brahman. They've got a fashion show tonight, and I know Richard's not taking part, but he's going to be there. He's looking forward to that.